Okay, Johnny Tremain by Esther Forbes. Illustrated by Lynd Ward. And published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. And we were just finishing, we're in chapter 4, The Rising Eye, and we finished sections 3 and 4, where Johnny goes to the Light home and he brings his cup so he can say, look, I am a part of this family. And he pulls out the cup, and Mr. Light says, that was the one that was stolen from me last August. And he already has the constable there. And Johnny gets arrested and taken to the jailhouse. But Rab comes and says, I know a lawyer, Josiah Quincy, who will be your lawyer for free. Because this is a case against Mr. Light, who is a Tory, and Rab is a son of liberty. And guess what? So is the jailer and the key holder person. So anyway, it's kind of exciting. And then Johnny is in jail, and Scylla is the only one who has seen his cup. So she might be the only one who could testify on his behalf. But of course, Mrs. Lapham said she is going to keep her under lock and key on the day of his trial. Let's find out what happens. Section 5. Mr. Justice Dana was a stout and florid man, dressed in a black silk robe and a great woolly white wig. Johnny sat close to Mr. Quincy, watching the justice's nervous, taut hands, listening to his "What have we here's?" and quick questions to the men and women shoved up before him. Some people he dismissed, some he ordered fined or whipped, oh dear, or set in the stocks. That means you have to be out in public and shamed, publicly shamed, or held for a higher court. Johnny knew when his own case would soon be called because he heard the justice tell a beadle to run down to Long Wharf and tell Merchant Light to present himself in half an hour, like a young assistant. Once again, Johnny squirmed about, studying every face in the courtroom. Rab and Scylla were not there, and he was frightened. Mr. Quincy whispered to him, "Rab said he'd get her here by 11. Rab's never slipped yet." Johnny liked his young lawyer, a frail man, flushed with fever. His cough was prophetic of an early death, like a prophecy, oh, this poor guy, he's so sickly, he's going to die young. That was how Johnny's mother had died, burned up by fever, coughing herself to death. The man had a mobile, passionate face, handsome except for one wall eye, which I believe is like an eye that doesn't always focus where it's supposed to. Mr. Light arrived, escorted by his poor relative and clerk Sewell. He entered as though he owned the court, calling a cheery good morning to Mr. Justice, interrupting the mumbled explanation of a shabby bakeress accused of selling moldy bread. Next, there was a rattle of light gig wheels, a jingle of horse gear, and to the intense pleasure of everyone, Miss Lavinia Light entered and, as modestly as she was able, took a seat near the door. It's like a big thing when she shows up. Even the justice straightened the bands at his throat. Sewell blushed. The bakeress forgot what she was saying as she turned to gape at the beautiful dark woman, darkly dressed. Restless, easily bored, Miss Light often did unexpected things. Jonathan Light versus Johnny Tremain, alias Jonathan Light Tremain. Mr. Quincy gave him a secret pat on the knee. Johnny knew he must now step forward, take his oath on the Bible to tell the truth, the whole truth, so help him God. He was frightened, for as he stepped forward, he was conscious that these might be the first steps toward those gallows waiting in the dark beyond the town gates. Next, Mr. Light was called and was taking the same oath. Mr. Quincy's one good eye caught Johnny's. He was forming words on his lips. The clock had indeed struck 11, and there, Standing in the doorway were Rab and Scylla. He got her out. Rab, enigmatic, dark, capable, looked as always. Scylla had on a hood that half covered her face. Mr. Light was talking as informally as though he and Mr. Dana were alone together, sitting at a tavern, cracking walnuts, drinking Madeira. He told how his great-grandfather, Jonathan Light, mayor of Causeway, Kent, England, had had 6 identical cups made, one for each of his sons. 4 of these cups had come to this country, and these he himself had owned until last August. On the night of the 23rd, a thief or thieves had broken a pane out of his dining room window. The space was too small to admit a grown man, so it was a half-grown boy who had slipped in and taken only one of the famous cups. Then he snapped his fingers at Sewell, who stepped forward and set 4 silver cups on the table before the justice. "This is the stolen cup," Mr. Light said confidently. "I've tied a red ribbon on it." Then he went on to tell with considerable humor and a bright sparkle in his slippery black eyes about Johnny's visit to his shop, his claims of kinship, and how he had lured him to his house with the stolen cup. The justice said, "Mr. Light, could it not be possible that this boy is related to you? Could his story be true?" No, it was impossible. Would Mr. Justice Dana be so good as to glance at this indenture, which the boy's erstwhile master, Mr. Lapham, had been so kind as to lend him? The name was put down as Johnny Tremain, nothing about Light. Undoubtedly, older heads than this boy's had egged him on to this wretched, scurvy trick, but Mr. Light had no wish to go into the matter beyond the recovery of his own property. He did not wish to suggest in any way that the Laphams had any part in the imposture. They were very humble, honest, pious folk. He believed that the case of the theft, all that interested him at the moment was dead open and shut against the boy. And might he ask the death penalty? So Mr. Light is asking for the death penalty against Johnny. There was too much thieving going on in Boston. Poor apprentices were getting out of hand. The gallows had been too long empty. "That's for the court to say," said the justice sourly. He took snuff, and Mr. Light took snuff, and they sneezed pshoo, pshoo, together. Sounds like a horrible thing. Mr. Quincy led Johnny on to tell his own story. The boy spoke confidently now that Rab and Scylla were there. He had never had an audience before, and he felt the courtroom hanging on his words, believing him. He spoke better and better. He told how his mother had given him the cup, the little that she had told him. She had bidden him not to part with the cup ever, nor ever to go to the Lights unless he had come to the end of everything. Then he spoke simply and easily of his accident, his hunt for work, his despair and arrest. There was a murmur almost of applause. "Johnny," said Mr. Quincy, "did you obey your mother and never show your cup to anyone?" "Once I disobeyed. It was the 2nd day of last July. I forgot or didn't heed. I told my master's daughter, Priscilla Lapham, what my mother said was my true name and about the cup. She wanted to see it. It was just dawn, that is, the dawn of the 3rd of July. Tuesday it was. Scylla was called. Johnny had always thought her a shy girl, but she stood up straight before the judge, speaking in her clear, low voice. He was proud of her, and he had always thought her a skinny, plain girl. She looked at the moment just about beautiful to him. As she finished, there was a sensation in the courtroom that outweighed the arrival of Mr. Lyte and even his handsome daughter. Isana, her bright curls in wild array, flew into the courtroom. Seeming like a mouse to run without feet, she stopped for no oath, no formalities, but flung herself upon Mr. Justice Dana, telling over again Scylla's story. Johnny knew she had been sound asleep when he had told Scylla. She had even been in bed when he had actually shown the cup to her older sister. He was amazed at the vividness of her jumbled recital and touched by the virtues she attributed to himself. Yet she was making it all up. In vain Mr. Justice Dana's, "What have we here?" and "I cannot accept this as testimony," and Scylla's attempts to quiet her. She was so enchanting, so seemingly come from another world, she had her say. "Bless me," said Mr. Justice, blowing his nose. "And how old might you be?" "8, sir, going on for 9. "There now, be a good girl. Here, you take this piece of licorice I have in my pocket and sit down quietly and eat it. There." Almost immediately, he dismissed the case. "Case dismissed." There was not the slightest evidence that the justice was saying that the accused had stolen a cup, nor that the cup with the red ribbon, now illegally in the possession of Mr. Lyte, was the same one as was stolen from his house last August. Evidence was against that, for these young Lapham misses had proved to his satisfaction, and might he point out to Mr. Lyte his own testimony about the high character of honesty and piety of the Laphams enjoyed, that unlikely as it might seem, the apprentice had possession of a silver cup, undoubtedly one of the original 6 ordered by the mayor of Causeway, Kent. He bade Johnny Tremain take the one with the red ribbon. It was his own. If he liked, he might even bring a suit against Mr. Lyte. Didn't recommend it. Mr. Lyte was too powerful. The judge has ruled in favor. Johnny Tremain, you are innocent of the crime Mr. Lyte accused you of. This is indeed your cup. It was yours before Mr. Lyte's was stolen. We do not know what happened to Mr. Lyte's. But since Mr. Lyte has accused you of thieving, you can sue him. And there would be something called libel. But he says, I don't recommend you do that. Mr. Lyte is too powerful. So Johnny took the cup. In a moment, he and Mr. Quincy, Rab, and Scylla were standing in the sunshine of the street outside the courthouse. They were so happy they could only laugh. The lawyer said now they would all go together as his guests to a tavern to eat at their leisure and drink a health to Johnny from the cup. But where was Isana? She was standing with a tiny hand in one of Miss Lyte's gloved ones, gazing up at her in adoration. Scylla called her crossly. Miss Lyte stepped up into her high gig. It was a long step, but she was a lithe, long-legged woman. She said, panted Isana, she had never seen anything like me, not even in some lane in London. Drury Lane, said young Mr. Quincy dryly. I was thinking of that myself. Rab, said the little girl, was I really all right? Just about perfect, only some of it you put in the first person, so it wasn't quite the truth, but you'll never starve. Then she tried to kiss Johnny, but he thought it beneath his dignity to be kissed on the street. You're too mussed up with licorice, he said. She bent and kissed his burned hand. He said nothing. He was suddenly afraid he might cry. Oh my gosh, I want to cry myself. Be a subscriber and see the next video. See you soon.